Pragmatism over politics. Starmer eyes EU. Ties to ease living costs. Starmer promises cost of living relief. While ruling out a return to the EU single market, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer has said his government wants to reduce the cost of living by rebuilding parts of Britain's relationship with the European Union, but without reversing Brexit or rejoining the EU single market. Speaking amid public frustration over high food prices, energy bills and weak wage growth, Starmer argued that Britain needs a more practical and less ideological approach to trade and regulation if families are to feel better off. Starmer made clear that his plan is based on issue-by-issue cooperation with the EU rather than full reintegration. This means closer alignment in specific areas, such as agriculture standards, energy markets, and trade rules that affect everyday costs, especially groceries and business expenses. However, he firmly ruled out rejoining the single market, the customs union, or restoring freedom of movement, saying Brexit is settled under his leadership. His message was that the UK can work more closely with Europe where it benefits consumers, without undoing the 2016 referendum result. The Prime Minister also linked cost of living pressures to deeper structural problems in the UK economy. He acknowledged that prices cannot fall meaningfully without tackling issues such as low real wages, weak competition, and excessive profiteering in essential services. Labour figures and supporters have pointed to sectors like water and energy, arguing that years of privatisation have contributed to rising bills and poor service, and that reform in these areas is necessary to deliver lasting relief. Starmer's comments have sparked sharp political debate. Critics on the pro-Brexit side accuse him of trying to quietly reverse Brexit, despite his repeated denials. Pro-EU voices, meanwhile, argue that selective alignment is a sensible way to reduce costs and remove trade barriers that have hurt businesses and consumers since leaving the EU. Starmer has also pointed to broken promises made during the Brexit campaign, noting that claims of £350 million a week for the NHS and sharp reductions in immigration never materialised. With local and national elections approaching, Starmer is attempting to balance two competing pressures, reassuring voters that Brexit will not be undone, while convincing the public that closer cooperation with Europe can help bring down prices and stabilise the economy. Issue-by-issue alignment with the EU is meant to reduce everyday costs by cutting the extra friction and expenses that were added to trade after Brexit, without fully rejoining the single market. By aligning rules in specific areas such as food standards, agriculture and energy markets, the UK can reduce border checks, paperwork, delays and compliance costs for businesses importing and exporting goods. This makes it cheaper and faster to move food and other essentials across borders, which can lower wholesale prices and over time ease pressure on supermarket prices for items like meat, dairy, and fresh produce. In the energy sector, closer cooperation with European markets can improve supply stability and efficiency, helping to smooth price spikes rather than directly slashing bills overnight. However, experts widely agree that these benefits will be gradual, not immediate. Businesses need time to adapt. Contracts must be renegotiated, and savings are usually passed on slowly. Any noticeable impact on household bills is more likely to be felt over months to a few years. And even then, the effect may be modest unless combined with wider domestic policies on wages, competition and regulation. In public statements and debate, the government's main response has been to acknowledge that key Brexit campaign promises, such as an extra £350 million a week for the NHS and sharp reductions in immigration, did not materialise as claimed, and to frame this as a lesson in the danger of oversimplified political messaging. Keir Starmer and senior ministers have argued that future policy must be based on realistic economic evidence rather than slogans, with greater transparency about trade-offs and consequences. In practice, however, critics note that there has been little formal accountability for those claims, no official reckoning comparable to an inquiry, and no clear mechanism to sanction misleading campaign promises. Instead, the lesson the current government says it has drawn is procedural, relying more heavily on independent economic analysis, impact assessments, and institutions like the Office for Budget Responsibility, and avoiding ideological red lines that limit policy choices. Supporters say this reflects a shift toward pragmatism, while skeptics argue that without stricter rules on political honesty and clearer consequences for misinformation, the risk of future economic miscalculations remains. Whether this careful middle ground will ease living costs and win over sceptical voters and MPs remains one of the key political tests facing his government.